Okay, so what we're going to do in this video is look at some of the special parallelograms. Special parallelograms include rhombuses, rectangles, and squares. They're special parallelograms because they have some additional properties that other parallelograms don't have. But because they are parallelograms, the opposite sides will be parallel, opposite sides will be congruent, opposite angles will be congruent, and the diagonals will bisect each other, right? So those four properties, plus the additional that the consecutive interiors, so this is x and this is y, then x plus y will have to equal 180, right? And this will be x as well. So those four properties of parallelograms are true for our special parallelograms. But these are special, so when you're looking at these pictures and diagrams, you're thinking to yourself, does this have an additional property, right? So what does a rhombus have? Rhombuses are equilateral, meaning all the sides are congruent. So if it's a parallelogram and all the sides are congruent, it's got to be a rhombus, okay? Now, that's the property for the sides. What we have over here is the diagonals will be perpendicular. They will intersect at a right angle, creating four right triangles. What will also happen is that the diagonals will bisect the angles, creating a line of symmetry. All right? There is a line of the diagonals create two lines of symmetry. Two lines of symmetry. You can fold a rhombus on top of each other, on top of itself, and you will create two triangles. Right? So, two lines of symmetry for a rhombus. It's equilateral. All the sides are congruent. Its diagonals are perpendicular. And it bisects the angles. Okay? That's a rhombus. A rectangle is an equiangular. Sorry, no L in equiangular. Equiangular rectangle. Equiangular parallelogram is a rectangle. All the angles are the same, so that means they all have to be 90-degree angles. Right? And when we look at the diagonals, what does the diagonal do? The diagonals are congruent. The diagonals are congruent. Each of the little pieces are congruent. Now, if you look closely at that, what does that mean? It means you've created some isosceles triangles here. So, you will have created two sets of isosceles triangles. Now, a rectangle has also two lines of symmetry. And it goes through the sides. Two lines of symmetry. Right? Two lines of symmetry. All right? So there's a little bit of juxtaposition here where a rhombus has equal sides, right? Congruent sides. A rectangle has congruent angles. Right? A rhombus has perpendicular diagonals, and a rectangle has congruent diagonals. But it also has perpendicular sides. Right? So a rhombus has congruent sides, a rectangle has perpendicular sides. A rhombus has perpendicular diagonals, a rectangle has congruent diagonals. They flip-flop on each other. All right, now a square is regular, meaning that all the properties of a rectangle and all the properties of a rhombus. All the sides are congruent. All of the angles are congruent. The diagonals bisect each other and they're congruent. And they intersect at a right angle, which means all of these angles are going to be 45 degrees. They're all congruent to each other. Okay? So, squares are regular, right? They have congruent sides and perpendicular sides. They have congruent diagonals and perpendicular diagonals. And a square has 4 lines of symmetry. 2 through the center of the sides, 2 through the diagonals. Okay, those are your properties of special right triangles. Squares, rectangles, rhombuses, they're all parallelograms, and they all have these special properties that you need to be aware of. And on the back page, we just do a little bit of practicing here. You want to write all that apply to each number, right? So if it's equilateral, well, I know that a rhombus is equilateral, so I'll say D. And a square is equilateral, so I'll also say E. Rectangles are not equilateral. Parallelograms are not equilateral. Quadrilaterals are not equilateral. At least they don't have to be. You can give me an example of one that is not, then you're not putting this here. We're only putting things that are required, that have to be, right? So a rectangle is equal angular, and so is a square, right? So go through here and just kind of complete this. You're only putting letters where the property is always true. And the last question's down here, right? Parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Well, the best name for that would be a rhombus. Sure, a square has 4 congruent sides as well, but having 4 congruent sides is not enough information to call it a square. The sides have to be congruent and they have to be perpendicular to be a square. So the best you can say is rhombus. So complete this notes, bring it back to class, and then we'll practice this in class.